The rain had already soaked through her coat when she checked the time for the 20th time, standing outside the dimly lit cafe as evening traffic hummed around her. 2 hours, 2 full hours of waiting, hoping, imagining what he might look like, rehearsing what she would say, and battling the small, sharp voice inside her that whispered she had made a mistake. The city lights blurred around her, as if the world itself couldn't decide whether to fade or shine, and in that moment she felt suspended between hope and heartbreak. She had come because she promised herself she would give life one more chance, but as the minutes melted into disappointment, she wondered if life had already made its decision about her. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the unexpected ways life turns around, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything. Her name was Sarah, 33, soft-spoken, gentle in nature, but heavy with the weight of a past that had bruised her heart more than she dared to admit. She wasn't new to heartbreak, but this time felt different. It wasn't about romance anymore. It was about the courage to try again, after years of not trying at all. A friend at work had set her up on this blind date, insisting that the man, Daniel, was thoughtful, honest, and exactly the kind of person who would never leave her waiting in the cold. And for a moment she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, her friend was right. But 2 hours was a long time. Long enough for hope to rot into embarrassment, long enough for her to wonder if being forgotten was simply becoming a theme in her life. She pushed open the cafe door at last, not because she had any intention of going inside, but because her hands were too cold to keep holding her phone. The warmth inside brushed over her like a fragile promise. A barista gave her a sympathetic smile. She didn't know whether it was for the rain or the loneliness stitched into Sarah's expression. She sat at a corner table, pretending she came only for coffee, trying to hide the trembling of her hands. She wrapped them around the cup the moment it arrived, letting the warmth seep into her fingers, grounding her. She didn't cry. She refused to cry. She had shed enough tears in life to fill an ocean, and she was tired of drowning. But as she stared outside at the wet pavement reflecting headlights like scattered stars, memories of past disappointments washed through her. The proposal that never came, the partner who walked away without explanation, the friendships that faded without warning, the dreams she once held tightly that now felt foreign, like they belonged to another version of her, someone who believed life had beautiful surprises waiting around the corner. She wasn't that girl anymore, or at least that's what she thought. The cafe door chimed. She didn't look up at first. Why would she? She wasn't expecting anything anymore. But the sound was followed by rushed breathing, the kind that carried regret, urgency, and a desperation that tugged at something instinctive in her heart. A voice asked the barista something, a chair scraped, and then footsteps approached her table. She finally glanced up, and her breath faltered. It wasn't the man she expected. In fact, he wasn't a man in the way she imagined for a date. He was older, maybe in his late 60s, with silver hair that curled slightly at the ends, and a face that looked both kind and exhausted. His coat dripped from the rain, and his eyes held a sorrow that struck a chord inside her before he even spoke.
He apologized first, not as Daniel, but as someone who had stumbled into her night with a weight he carried like a second skin. He explained that he had seen her waiting outside earlier. He was across the street buying flowers for someone he would never get the chance to meet again. He said he noticed the way she kept looking at the street, the way disappointment slowly carved into her posture, the same way grief had carved into him years ago. He didn't sit until she quietly nodded, and even then he stayed on the edge of the chair, as if uncertain whether he deserved the space his body took in the world. His name was Thomas. He hadn't come for coffee. He had come because he recognized something he hadn't seen in another person in a long time: silent heartbreak, a kind he understood intimately. He told her he had lost his wife 3 years earlier, and that they used to come to this very cafe every Friday, rain or shine. Today was their anniversary. He had brought flowers to leave at the bench across the street where she always waited for him to finish his workdays. But when he approached the bench, he froze. He couldn't place the flowers down. He couldn't sit. The memories were too sharp, too vivid. He panicked and started walking, not knowing where to go, until he ended up wandering in circles, circles that kept bringing him back to the cafe and to the sight of her standing alone in the rain. Sarah listened, stunned, almost forgetting her own bruised evening, because the sincerity in his voice wrapped around her like a tender thread, pulling her into his world. She felt his grief as if it were her own, and in that strange, unexpected moment, her disappointment made space for someone else's pain. She didn't know why he had come to speak to her. Maybe he didn't know either. But sometimes, two wounded souls recognize each other before words can explain anything. He told her that when he watched her wait with so much hope, hope that slowly dimmed, he felt the ache he had lived through for years. He didn't want to interrupt her life, didn't want to meddle or assume anything, but when she finally went inside, shoulders slumped but spirit unbroken, he couldn't stay away. Something pulled him towards her, a kind of gentle impulse that made him believe that maybe the world allows people to heal in unexpected ways. Sarah wasn't sure what to say, but for the first time that night, she felt seen, not as someone waiting for a date, not as someone abandoned, but as a human being with a story worth noticing. And then, almost as if on cue, the cafe door chimed again. A man in his mid-30s stepped inside, soaked from the rain, breathless, scanning the room with frantic eyes. His hair stuck to his forehead, and his hand trembled slightly as he held on to the frame of the door. When he spotted Sarah, his expression crumbled into a mix of relief and guilt. It was Daniel, and everything shifted again. He approached, apologizing in broken bursts, explaining that he had been in a minor accident on the way, nothing serious, just enough to stall his car and send his phone tumbling into a puddle, leaving him unable to call. He said he ran the rest of the way because he couldn't let the chance slip away. She was told he was thoughtful and genuine, and in that moment she finally saw why. But she was torn. On one side of her table sat Daniel, the date she had hoped for. On the other side sat Thomas, the man who had brought depth, perspective, and unexpected healing to a night meant to be romantic, but destined to become something else entirely. The cafe felt impossibly small, holding 3 lives that had collided by something far bigger than chance. In that moment, Sarah realized she didn't want to rush toward anything, not romance, not forgiveness, not decisions. What she wanted was honesty. What she wanted was connection. What she wanted was to stop running from her own life. She told Daniel she was glad he made it, and that she appreciated his effort. She told him she didn't fault him for the delay. Life was unpredictable, and he had tried. But she also needed him to know she wasn't a person he could simply sweep into a date after 2 hours of emotional turmoil. She needed air, presence, and truth more than she needed a romantic rescue. Daniel understood. Something in his eyes softened. He offered to leave and return another day, no expectations attached, just a willingness to try again when she felt ready. When he left, the rain had softened outside, turning into a gentle drizzle. But Thomas remained. Not because he wanted anything from her, but because she quietly asked him to stay. She wasn't ready to say goodbye, not to the warmth of his presence, not to the rare comfort of being understood by a stranger whose pain mirrored her own. They talked for another hour, about his wife, about her dreams, about how time changes people in ways they never expect. She learned that he spent most of his days visiting places that reminded him of his wife, not because he couldn't move on,
but because he didn't want the memories to fade. She admired that. She envied it, because deep down, she wanted a love that left such an imprint. When they finally stepped outside, the city felt changed, lighter. The bench across the street glistened with raindrops reflecting streetlight glow. Thomas walked over and gently placed the flowers he had bought earlier onto it, his fingers brushing the bench as if touching a memory. Sarah watched from a few steps behind, feeling the quiet beauty of the moment seep into her bones. She understood then that life wasn't about perfect timing. It wasn't about plans going right, or dates showing up on time, or every hope being rewarded. It was about moments, unexpected, raw, honest moments that shift something within us. As Thomas turned back to her, he smiled, a small, fragile smile that carried gratitude and release. He thanked her for listening, for letting him share a piece of his story, for simply existing in the same place on a night when he needed someone, anyone who understood. When they parted, Sarah felt something inside her settle. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. In the days that followed, she met Daniel again, not because she was obligated, but because she wanted to try. She wanted to give herself a chance at something new, something gentle. Their story unfolded slowly, with patience and sincerity, grounded in the respect he showed her that night. And as for Thomas, she saw him again too, at the cafe, at the bench. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they simply shared silence, but every time she felt the same quiet comfort. He didn't feel a romantic void, he filled a human one. Months later, on a crisp afternoon, she realized something profound, that the night she thought would break her became the night that mended her in ways she could have never anticipated. Because she wasn't stood up by life, she was guided, redirected, taught. That sometimes the person you're waiting for isn't the one you need in that moment, and sometimes the one who sits across from you unexpectedly changes everything. If this story touched your heart, even in the smallest way, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps more stories like this reach people who might need them. Before the story ends, please comment below, "I believe in second chances." Sarah walked past the bench months later and noticed fresh flowers resting there. She didn't know whether Thomas had left them or whether someone else had begun to love the space he once shared with his wife, but she smiled, knowing that life, like that bench, like that night, like her heart, still held room for new beginnings. And as she continued walking toward the cafe where Daniel waited, she realized something beautiful. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was living. The end.